Hi book buddies, I'm Eric from Lonesome Reader. You know, there's a special excitement that comes from discovering a new writer, and it's kind of fun to imagine that, like, what if one day this writer becomes so renowned, like George Eliot or Tolstoy, and here I was in 2017 reading their very first novel. But I also just love encountering a voice which is so fresh, and a point of view and a style of writing which I've never come across before. So just like last year, I made a video about 10 exciting debut novels from 2016. I want to make a new video about 10 debut novels from 2017 that I think are particularly special. Obviously, there are plenty of debut novels that have been published this year that I haven't had time to read. So if you've read a debut novel or a debut author that you think is particularly exciting, please let me know about it in the comments below. So first of all, Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi. And I know for Americans, this was a novel that came out last year, but this novel was actually only published in the UK at the beginning of this year. Although it's been endlessly talked about on BookTube, I'd be remiss not to include it in my list because it's such a fantastically epic story that I thought totally lived up to the hype. I love a multi-generational saga, and I was gripped by almost every story that proceeds in the lineage of two separated sisters that are at the heart of this novel. I'm so curious to see what Gyasi will publish next. She must be under a lot of pressure to deliver after this amazing first novel. Stay With Me by Ayobami Adebayo. And I was so happy that this novel was shortlisted for the Bailey's Women's Prize for Fiction earlier this year. It's a deeply engaging story about the disintegration of a couple's relationship over a number of decades while they experience enormous social pressure living in Nigeria. And something that I thought was particularly good about it was the way it gave a balanced view of the man and the woman's dilemmas and how expectations for them differed based on their genders. But also the way that Adebayo folds this very personal tale within the context of larger political and social changes within the country. Next is The End of Eddy by Eduard. This is an explosive, tell-all tale about a sensitive young gay boy growing up in a tough working-class family in rural France. And part of me is so drawn to this book just because it's something that I keep thinking about. I'm not sure I entirely agree with all the author's assertions, but he has such an immensely forceful and compelling perspective, which makes his voice really unique. Spaceman of Bohemia by Jaroslav Kalfar. This novel is bonkers and beautiful. It's a fictional tale about the Czech Republic's first astronaut who is on a mission to investigate a strange purple cloud that is developed just outside of Venus, and all the strange things that happen as a consequence of that. But it's so much more than a space story. It's philosophical and political and psychologically insightful, while also being fantastically good fun. It is so good. One of the Boys by Daniel Magariel. This novel gave me all the feels. A tender story about a boy and his older brother growing up under the tyrannical influence of his domineering father. It begins with a heartbreaking betrayal and goes on to describe the conflict that these boys feel not living up to the masculine standards of their dad. It is so crisply and expertly written, it feels amazing that this is the author's first novel. The Shifting Pools by Duncan. This novel has an incredibly inventive and imaginative structure for getting to the heart of its story. It's about a girl who survives a catastrophic attack to her family's home in the Middle East, and her process of overcoming that reality in her adulthood by slipping into a fantasy world. I loved how this novel shows how we must continuously reinvent ourselves and the way that we see the world in order to reconcile our past and step into the future. My Absolute Darling by Gabriel Tallent. This novel is told from the perspective of one of the most forceful and original characters I've read in any book this year. 14-year-old Julia, or Turtle as she's nicknamed, is raised by her survivalist father who has a philosophical streak. It's brutal and emotional, and it describes her interaction with the natural world in the most beautiful way. But this is another novel that I still feel so compelled by because part of me feels really conflicted about it. So I'm particularly keen to discuss this book with other people who've read it. Marlena by Julie Buntin. I feel like this novel has gotten like a fair amount of attention in the US, but I wish it got more recognition in the UK. A woman reflects back on her years as an adolescent when her parents separated. She moved to a more rural and economically depressed location where she meets and befriends Marlena, who lives next door to her, and Marlena leads her into more delinquent and rebellious behavior. The story asks some tough questions about the choices that we make in life and the potential that we sacrifice. I particularly loved buddy reading this with my good friend and the booktuber Matthew Sharapa. I'll post a link to his video below because he has some particularly good, smart things to say about this book. Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney. This novel kind of caught me off guard because like in the beginning when I started reading it, I thought it was a bit of a like frivolous story about a group of friends and their torrid love affairs. And it is about that. But as the story went on, it acquired a lot more resonance as it shows the strengths and the limitations of friendship and the kinds of things that we withhold from friends even in times when we need their support the most. It's told partly through texts and emails, and particularly the way that we can obsess over these things when we receive them from someone who we perceive as particularly important to us in our lives. I think the author has a really striking new perspective. Goodbye Vitamin by Rachel Khong. The author tells this story in what amounts to a series of diary entries about a woman who returns to her parents' home to help care for her father, who's in the early stages of Alzheimer's disease. This is in many ways a nightmarish and heartbreaking situation, but she incorporates so much humor with all of her small observations about quirky things that show the real humanity of the characters involved. It's such an original book that I raced through reading it because it is so good. So those are some fantastic debut novels that I'd particularly recommend. I hope these authors go on to publish a lot more. If you're curious to know more of my thoughts about these books, I'll post links to my full reviews of them below if you click show more. If you've read any of them, let me know what you think in the comments below, or if you've read any other particularly good debut books this year, let me know about those in the comments too. I'm always keen to hear about exciting new authors. So thanks for watching, and I hope you're all doing well. I'll speak to you soon. Happy reading, everyone.